Zhou Fight could already feel that his opponent's attacks were getting weaker and weaker. That half-holy artifact of yours doesn't seem to be that easy to use. He chuckled. In the next second, he teleported to a place about a light year away from Becky. Then, with the Zhuanyuan divine sword in hand, he slashed at Becky 12 times in a row. A total of 12 streams of sword ki shot towards us. Becky, sealing off all his escape space at the same time, seeing that he couldn't dodge, Becky gritted his teeth and took out a golden rag from his world rings. He raised him to the sky and saw the golden rag expand in the wind. In the blink of an eye, it had become a huge golden cloth that could almost blot out the sky. The huge golden cloth enveloped Becky's body to block the attack of the myriad star sword. After the first 6 all methods, stellar swords landed on Wondo, the golden cloth. The golden cloth perfectly defended against them. However, when the 7th all methods stellar sword landed on the golden cloth, moderate damage appeared for the first time. When the 8th all methods stellar sword landed on the golden cloth, the damage increased further. Then came the 9th, the 10th, rip. This huge golden cloth with the defense of the quasi-supreme will realm was completely torn apart. It could no longer block the subsequent attacks of the all methods star sword. Becky still wanted to use the half-holy artifact in his hand to block the last 2 swords. However, after using this quasi-supreme will divine artifact, he didn't have much divine power left. How could he withstand it? Therefore, the 11th sword beam directly sent his blood-supreme demonic scythe flying and struck him. Then, the last sword beam sliced his body in half. Ah! Becky's screams resounded throughout the entire battlefield. All. The god spirits who were fighting couldn't help but be attracted by this tragic cry. When the god spirit soldiers of the blood god army saw Becky's body cut into 2, their expressions immediately changed drastically. In particular, the quasi-supreme will realm blood god who was fighting Lord of 10,000 Evils exclaimed, "Your Majesty." Then he roared at Zhou Fight, common people's regal. "How dare you? Our Majesty is the successor of the Crimson Overlord, the future Crimson Overlord. How dare you kill our Majesty? What are your intentions? You can't blame me for that." Zhou Fight also heard the other party's words. He said lightly, "Originally, I had no intention of killing your Majesty. However, your Majesty is too shameless. He even violated the basic rules of the battlefield. So, don't blame me. If you want to blame someone, blame your unruly Majesty." With that, the Zhuanyuan divine sword in his hand stabbed directly at Becky's brain. When Becky saw this scene, despair appeared on his face. He never expected that the lunatic Zhou Fight would really dare to kill him, even after knowing that he was the successor of the Crimson Overlord. Wasn't this guy afraid of the Crimson Overlord's revenge? Even if the Supreme Will came, it would probably hesitate for a moment if it wanted to kill him. This fellow's killing intent was actually so firm and decisive. Even the Supreme Will is not as ruthless as you. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have provoked this lunatic. If he hadn't provoked him, he wouldn't have ended up in such a state. Seeing that the Zhuanyuan divine sword was getting closer and closer to his head, Becky wanted to struggle before he died. However, the supreme divine power that had been exhausted in his body made him unable to resist at all. He closed his eyes in fear, not daring to look at the scene of his impending death. At this moment, a voice suddenly appeared in his mind. It was the voice of the Supreme Will. At the same time, a voice also appeared in Zhou Fight's mind. "Zhou Fight, spare Becky's life. He is one of the successors of the Crimson Overlord. He cannot be killed at will." It was as if Zhou Fight did not hear the Supreme Will's words. But he pierced Becky's head with his sword and crushed the Supreme God Divine spark in his brain into powder. Becky's body stiffened, and then he immediately stopped breathing. Becky was dead. When Zhou Fight saw this, he looked relieved. Then he reacted and said in surprise, "Lord Supreme Will, were you the one who spoke in my mind just now? I was fighting this guy with all my might just now and didn't have the energy to pay attention to anything outside the battle, so I didn't hear what you just said. What did you say just now? Can you tell me again?" Supreme Will. "Yes, Your Majesty." Another quasi-supreme will blood god roared in the distance. He fought desperately in extreme anger. Fortunately, Lord of 10,000 Evil's combat strength was not inferior at all. Even if he unleashed his potential, he was still suppressed by the Lord of 10,000 Evils. The Lord of 10,000 Evils even had the energy to transmit his voice to Zhou Fight. "I've transcended. Brother Common Peoples, Regal, in the future, when we're outside, you'll be my brother and I'll be your brother. I won't call myself a brother anymore. He even dared to kill the successor of the Crimson Overlord. Even God, King Heaven Punishment, and Dharma, Lord Spring Autumn wouldn't dare to do such a thing. After the shock, the Lord of 10,000 Evils also became worried. Killing Becky would make us feel good, but the consequences of killing him are very hard to bear. The Crimson Overlord will definitely take the initiative to find trouble with you. You have to be prepared. Brother, I won't abandon you. When the time comes, just say that we killed him together. With the two of us taking the blame together, even the Crimson Overlord wouldn't dare to punish us too severely. After all, we are the reserve army of the Supreme Lord. He also has to be wary of our identities. He should be wary. Towards the end, the Lord of 10,000 Evils was a little uncertain. Crimson Overlord did things without any restrictions. It was the complete opposite of the Supreme Will's style. At the thought of this, the Lord of 10,000 Evils suddenly became a little timid. However, he didn't take back what he had said. Since he had already decided to take the blame with his brother, he wouldn't regret it. When Zhou Fight heard the Lord of 10,000 Evils' words, he could not help but feel speechless. However, this guy's personality was indeed very likable, so Zhou Fight did not deny it. To have a Supreme Lord Reserve army as a follower, thinking about it, was really a little satisfying. He looked at the battlefield and to realize that his own army and the 1,000 Evil Army's God Spirit army were still fighting Becky's Blood God army. With the augmentation of the Blood Supreme Demon, Scythe's semi-holy artifact domain, these guys could barely pose a threat to their army. When Zhou Fight saw this, he immediately retrieved Becky's spoils of war. It could only be said that Becky was indeed worthy of being the Scarlet Supreme Reserve Army. He had more than 100 Supreme Divine artifacts. There were a total of 5 quasi-Supreme Will Realm treasures. Needless to say, it was a half-holy artifact. Blood Supreme Demonic Scythe. What surprised Zhou Fight the most was that he had also discovered a Supreme Will treasure in the other party's world ring. This treasure was a golden plant that looked like a baby. It emitted a refreshing aura. Zhou Fight only smelled it for a second before he felt that the willpower he had consumed today had recovered a lot. What a treasure. Zhou Fight looked surprised. He looked over, and the treasure information appeared. Treasure name, Innate Sacred Heart. Treasure grade, willpower level, superior. Treasure effect. After a Supreme Will Realm existence consumes it, when that Supreme Will Realm existence dies, it can be reborn through the Innate Sacred Heart. Treasure description. An ownerless treasure that was originally floating in the ultimate void. Later on, Becky, who was searching for treasures in the ultimate void, happened to encounter it and kept it. Note: only those who possess the will of a supreme will can recognize this treasure as their master. Innate Sacred Heart. This treasure can actually allow a Supreme Will Realm existence to have a second life. What kind of treasure is this? Even an existence at the Supreme Will Realm would probably go crazy over this treasure, right? Zhou Fight looked at this treasure and even felt a sense of trepidation. Becky was really lucky to be able to obtain such a treasure in the ultimate void. He immediately put it into his #1 treasure vault without thinking. He decided to keep this treasure for himself. Even though he was only a grade 1 supreme god and was still far from the Supreme Will Realm, he believed that he would be able to reach it sooner or later. At that time, this treasure would become his life-saving treasure. Becky's luck is indeed good. It's indeed a little unlucky to say that. He clearly has a supreme treasure that can revive, but only existences at the Supreme Will Realm can use it. So much so that he died hugging a treasure. Zhou Fight shook his head. This guy died aggrievedly. Then he took out Becky's second most precious spoils of war. It was the Blood Supreme Demonic Scythe. He used the power of his will to make it recognize him as his master. He then activated the ability of this half-holy artifact. In the next second, the thin blood mist emitted by the Blood Supreme Demonic Scythe that covered the battlefield within a radius of 100,000 light-years was absorbed back by the Blood Supreme Demonic Scythe, like a whale. In less than a moment, the blood mist on the entire battlefield disappeared. On the other hand, the Blood God Army's soldiers, whose strength had temporarily increased due to the magic sickle blood mist domain, also fell back rapidly. In fact, they became even weaker. It seems that the temporary increase in strength obtained by using the Blood Supreme Demonic Scythe's blood mist is not without a price. Zhou smiled when he saw this. The following situation wasn't beyond his expectations. Without Becky as their leader, and without the enhancement of the Demon Scythe Blood Mist domain, the morale and strength of this group of Blood God Army soldiers suffered a heavy blow. Them, whose strength was inferior to the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom's God Spirit Army, was almost beaten up by the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom's God Spirit Army and the Thousand Evil Army in the following period of time. In less than an hour, Becky's Blood God Army was completely destroyed. Even the Blood God with the strength of the quasi-supreme Will Realm was personally killed by the Lord of 10,000 Evils. Awesome. The Lord of 10,000 Evils carried the other party's corpse to Zhou Fight and said happily, "It's been a long time since we had such a good fight." With that, he handed the corpse to Zhou Fight. "Your spoils of war. Why are you giving them to me?" Zhou Fight waved goodbye. "It's not for free. Big brother, can I use this quasi-supreme Will Realm corpse to exchange for a few supreme divine artifacts? I already have quite a number of supreme gods under my command, but there are still too few supreme divine artifacts. Some supreme gods are even using Master God tier divine artifacts as their main weapons." The Lord of 10,000 Evils complained, "Zhou Fight." He felt that this guy had let go of a lot in a certain aspect after recognizing his brother's position. "Do you know about the Supreme Divine Artifact I gave to the Supreme Will?" Zhou Fight suddenly asked. "I also just received the news. I heard that on the battlefield over at God King Heaven Punishment's side because of the 100,000 Supreme Divine Artifacts that Big Brother gave him. The entire Twilight Battlefield's situation has improved a lot." The Lord of 10,000 Evils smiled. There were a total of 100,000 Supreme Divine Artifacts. This was something that could not be hidden even if he wanted to. The Lord of 10,000 Evils didn't even need to specially inquire, and this news had already reached his ears. Otherwise, he wouldn't have suddenly proposed such a deal to Zhou Fight. "How many Supreme Divine Artifacts do you want to exchange for?" Zhou Fight nodded and asked. 60? The Lord of 10,000 Evils probed. The price he mentioned was already considered very fair. He had given Zhou Fight the corpse of a quasi-supreme Will Realm enemy after all. If he was lucky, it was very likely that he would obtain a quasi-supreme Will Realm treasure or even a quasi-supreme Will Realm inheritance from this corpse. Compared to the quasi-supreme Will level loots, the value of a supreme divine artifact was much lower. Supreme divine artifacts was a reasonable price. Zhou Fight also understood this logic. So he did not waste any time and directly threw a world ring to the other party. Lord of 10,000 Evils immediately took it and entered it with the power of will to check. Then his eyes immediately widened. There were a total of 600 Supreme Divine Artifacts stored in this world ring, even though they were all Supreme Divine Artifacts below Grade 3. Supreme Divine Artifacts, it still shocked Lord of 10,000 Evils quite a bit. He looked at Zhou Fight with eyes full of admiration. Was this the big brother that he had just acknowledged? As expected of the common people's regal who took out 100,000 Supreme God artifacts at once, this was simply too fucking rich. "Thank you, Big Brother Zhou." The Lord of 10,000 Evils was extremely happy. Zhou Fight shook his head nonchalantly. At this moment, a scarlet eye suddenly appeared in the sky. As soon as the scarlet eye appeared, the entire battlefield, no, the entire Ultimate Void battleground, turned scarlet. Endless scarlet fog appeared out of thin air and quickly covered a large number of war territories. Zhou Fight and the Lord of 10,000 Evils looked at each other and said respectfully, "Greetings, Lord Crimson Overlord." Zhou Zhou, who was far away in the Reincarnation Sacred Palace, stood up and said respectfully. The Crimson Overlord did not say anything. It just stared at Zhou Fight like a crazy and disorderly monster. In the next second, a red light lit up in his scarlet eyes. Zhou Fight, Zhou Zhou, and all of Zhou Zhou's clones fell asleep almost at the same time. After an unknown period of time, Zhou Fight opened his eyes. He saw the face of Lord of 10,000. Evils in front of him. Not far away was the figure of the Supreme Will. "Big Brother Zhou, you're finally awake." The Lord of 10,000 Evils heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Zhou Fight had woken up. "What happened to me just now?" Zhou Fight asked. At the same time, this was also a problem with the main body. At this moment, his main body and all his clones had also awakened in the Reincarnation Sacred Palace, the High Continent, and the various worlds. They all wanted to know what had just happened. "You were attacked by Lord Crimson Overlord just now. Fortunately, you have a treasure on you, and the Supreme Will saved you, saving your life. Or you could be dead," the Lord of 10,000 Evils said. With that said, he handed the treasure over. One of them was a will level, low level treasure, Resolute Treasure Seal. At this moment, it had completely shattered. The other was the will holy artifact, holy scripture of the heart. As a will holy artifact, the holy scripture of the heart did not shatter, but a crack appeared on its surface. Zhou heaved a sigh of relief, as long as it wasn't completely broken. "You're reckless," the Supreme Will said. "It was him who broke the rules first. If I don't kill Becky, I won't be able to calm down. It will be more difficult for me to advance to the Supreme Will realm in the future. Besides, I didn't kill him completely. Could it be that the Crimson Overlord can't even revive him?" Zhou asked. He had indeed held back. Otherwise, with his current methods, he could completely make Becky unable to revive. The Supreme Will said nothing. The Lord of 10,000 Evils smiled and said, "Big brother, you're right. Becky has indeed been revived by the Crimson Overlord, but he has also been stripped of his identity as the Crimson Overlord's successor. Now, there are only 3 successors left. Big brother, you forcefully defeated a Scarlet Supreme Reserve army." The Lord of 10,000 Evils said these words with a sense of pride. Zhou did not dare to speak because the Supreme Will had not spoken. Zhou thought for a moment and decided to admit his mistake. Supreme Will, the main reason why such a big thing happened this time was because I was worried about my own future, so I was too impulsive. "Please punish me, Supreme Will," Zhou said obediently. The Supreme Will sighed and said, "Forget it. I've already understood what happened. You really can't be entirely to blame for this matter. Becky was indeed a little too much." Zhou was overjoyed. However, in the next second, he heard the Supreme Will change his tone. "But you're too ruthless. You actually killed Becky." In order to apologize to the Crimson Overlord, I gave him 50,000 of the 100,000 Supreme Divine Artifacts you gave me last time. The Supreme Will sighed. The truth was that he had only given him 20,000 Supreme Divine Artifacts. He had only said those words to scare Zhou so that he would pay more attention next time. When Zhou heard this, he did not hesitate to take out 50,000 Supreme Divine Artifacts from his #1 treasure vault and give them to the other party. "Lord Supreme Will, I still have 50,000 Supreme Divine Artifacts here. I'll give them to you directly. Take them back first to deal with the emergency." As soon as he said that, not to mention the Lord of 10,000 Evils, even the Supreme Will was stunned. Another 50,000 Supreme Divine Artifacts? Didn't he already give him 100,000 Supreme Divine Artifacts last time? How long had it been since then? And he had already given him so many Supreme Divine Artifacts. How many Supreme Divine Artifacts did this guy have? The Supreme Will remained outwardly impassive, even though he was shocked. He received the 50,000 Supreme Divine Artifacts and sighed. Other than the Supreme Divine Artifacts, I also gave the Crimson Overlord 1 million Grade 1 Supreme God Crystals. Upon hearing this, Zhou took out 5 million Grade 1 Supreme God Divine Crystals from his #1 treasure vault without hesitation. He had collected more than 20 million Supreme God Crystals yesterday, a mere 5 million Grade 1. Supreme God. Divine Crystals was nothing to Zhou. When the Supreme Will saw the world ring that Zhou handed over, he could not help but fall into deep thought again. He put it away and said nonchalantly, "In addition to the Supreme Divine Artifacts and Supreme God Crystals, I also compensated the Crimson Overlord with 10 million Supreme God-level Divine Herbs." Zhou worked. No matter how slow he was, he knew that the other party was asking for treasures from him. However, he thought for a moment and said, "Lord Supreme Will, I do have 10 million Supreme God-level Divine Herbs on me, but after the Crimson Overlord's attack just now, my Holy Scripture of the Heart was also damaged. The Resolute Treasure Seal, a low-level will-level treasure, was directly destroyed. I wonder if you can help me repair them." The Lord of 10,000 Evils, who was listening at the side, immediately widened his eyes when he heard this. "Good God, you're actually bargaining with the Supreme Will? Do you really know who you're talking to?" However, what shocked Lord of 10,000 Evils even more was that, after hearing Zhou words, the Supreme Will thought for a moment and actually agreed readily. He waved his right hand, and the Will Holy Artifact, Holy Scripture of the Heart, flew in front of him. With a light tap of the Supreme Will, beams of pure white light flew out of his body and fused into the Holy Scripture of the Heart. In less than a moment, the Holy Scripture of the Heart that had just cracked had already recovered to its original state. He waved his hand gently, and the Holy Scripture of the Heart flew back to Zhou. Fight looked at the Holy Scripture of the Heart in front of him happily and heaved a sigh of relief. He still hoped to advance to the Supreme Will realm through the Holy Scripture of the Heart in the future. He could even advance, by leaps and bounds at the supreme will realm. If anything happened to the holy scripture of the heart, he would regret it for the rest of his life, right at that moment. The supreme will said, "It's easy to repair the holy scripture of the heart, but the resolute treasure seal is a treasure from another universe. In addition, it's completely damaged. Even I can't restore it to its original state. I'll tell you what. I'll give you another treasure that's not inferior to the resolute treasure seal at all, but you also have to give me 10 million supreme god-level minerals. Will you take it?" "Of course," Zhou Fight agreed without hesitation. Then he took out the world ring containing 10 million supreme god-level minerals and handed it to the supreme will. The supreme will received it and flipped his right hand. A talisman appeared in his hand and flew in front of Zhou Fight. Zhou Fight looked over. This talisman was entirely golden in color, and there were extremely complicated talismans engraved on its surface. These talismans emitted an extremely huge amount of willpower and power of faith. It could even make Zhou Fight, who had the strength of a quasi-supreme willpower realm, feel fear. He looked over expectantly. Treasure name: Divine Talisman of Faith. Treasure grade: willpower level, mid-level. Treasure effect: a supreme. Treasure condensed from the pure faith of a great believer from another universe. It can protect living beings with faith talismans from the influence of external willpower. The user can control the faith divine talisman to remove the mind control of other life forms. At most, it can remove the mind control used by supreme willpower realm experts. Treasure introduction. It comes from the possession of a great believer. After this great believer died, the faith condensed from his entire life condensed on this protective divine talisman, causing it to undergo a metamorphosis. It advanced from an ordinary 4th grade supreme god-level treasure to a supreme treasure at the will level and middle level. Oh, what a treasure. Zhou Fight's eyes lit up. The resolute treasure seal was only a will-level, low-level treasure. However, this faith talisman was a mid-level will-level treasure. It was a small level higher than the resolute treasure seal. The only disadvantage was that this faith talisman could only work on a single individual. It couldn't have any effect on his subordinates like the resolute treasure seal. However, Zhou Fight had already grasped the land of Earth, a minister of the king skill. Could such a top-notch domain-type law skill like the land of the king could completely use this law skill to protect his subordinates from the control of other enemies' wills? Therefore, this shortcoming was actually not too big of a shortcoming. Thank you, High Will. Zhou Fight looked at the divine talisman of faith for a while before reluctantly putting it away. Then, he thanked the supreme will. Zhou Fight felt that he had profited from being able to use supreme god-level minerals to exchange for a supreme treasure at the mid-level of willpower. He did not lack supreme god-level treasures at all, after all. He did not even need quasi-supreme will-level treasures. What he lacked was such supreme will-level treasures. The supreme will nodded and instructed, "Don't do anything so risky in the future." This time, it was the Crimson Overlord that showed mercy and allowed you to survive. If he didn't show any mercy, even I wouldn't be able to save you. Yes, Supreme Will. Zhou Fight nodded seriously. In fact, if Becky hadn't been so shameless, he wouldn't have killed him. Now that Becky was completely finished, he wouldn't do such an impulsive thing again. The Supreme Will nodded, then slowly disappeared. After the Supreme Will completely disappeared, the Lord of 10,000 Evils came to Zhou Fight with a shocked expression. This whole thing just went away? He asked in disbelief. What else? Zhou Fight chuckled. That's a Supreme Scarlet Reserve. You killed such a Supreme Scarlet Reserve, but now Lord Crimson Overlord and Lord Supreme Will are letting you off just like that? The Lord of 10,000 Evils was still extremely shocked. With that tone of yours, could it be that you want me to be punished by these two lords? Zhou Fight said unhappily. Not really, I'm just shocked. The Lord of 10,000 Evils hurriedly shook his head. Zhou Fight did not make things difficult for him and said, "The Supreme Will wouldn't punish me too much to begin with. He is probably still praising me in his heart. In recent years, Lord Supreme Will has always been at a disadvantage in the battle with the Crimson Overlord. Now, a newly promoted Supreme Lord Reserve can kill one of Lord Crimson Overlord's reserve army. I'm giving face to the Supreme Will. Do you think the Supreme Will is happy?" Lord of 10,000 Evils also reacted. "You're right. If I were the Supreme Will, even if I punished you on the surface, I might not be proud of you." After saying that, the Lord of 10,000 Evils couldn't help but look at Zhou Fight enviously. Then he thought for a moment and lamented, "You deserve all of this. Only a confident and decisive fellow like you would dare to personally kill the Supreme Scarlet Reserve Army. If it were me, even the Spring and Autumn Dharma Lord wouldn't dare to do so. God King Heaven Punishment dares? Zhou Fight asked curiously. He dares. The Lord of 10,000 Evils nodded without hesitation. That fellow is the same as you. He is a person who can't tolerate a grain of sand in his eyes. If he were to encounter a fellow like Becky, he would definitely kill him with his own hands. However, he had been famous for a long time, so very few god spirits dared to be as arrogant in front of him as Becky in his era. Zhou Fight nodded. After the Lord of 10,000 Evils and him cleaned up the battlefield, he left the White Dawn Void mystic realm. However, just as he and the Lord of 10,000 Evils left the White Dawn Void mystic realm, they saw a large number of Ultimate Void army waiting for them outside the Void mystic realm. They only took a glance, and the expressions of Zhou Fight and the Lord of 10,000 Evils turned solemn. This was because the Ultimate Void army was far superior to any of the Ultimate Void army that they had seen before. The number of ordinary god spirits alone had reached 100 billion in the Ultimate Void army in front of him. The number of true gods had reached 10 billion. The number of master gods had reached 100,000. And the number of supreme gods had reached 100. Even so, Zhou Fight's expression did not turn serious. What made Zhou Fight's expression turn solemn was that the two fellows standing in front of this Ultimate Void army were clearly the leaders of this Ultimate Void army. The leader on the left was wearing ice blue armor and holding an ice blue spear. His sharp and cold aura was extremely shocking. It was even enough to freeze the will of ordinary supreme gods. The leader on the right was wearing a colorful robe, and his body was wrapped in various bags of various sizes. Various strange beasts' cries could be vaguely heard from these bags. Some were terrifying, some were dignified, some were mysterious, and some were pleasant to the ears. The creatures who heard this sound could not help but guess what strange creatures were inside the colorful bags. A quasi-supreme will, state being, and two of them. The Void Emperor really thinks highly of me. He even called such a master over in order to deal with me. Zhou Fight muttered to himself. The Lord of 10,000 Evils also looked at Manan and Sheila solemnly. Big Brother Zhou, I might not be able to help you later. I just used a method to stimulate my potential and forcefully raised my strength to the quasi-supreme willpower realm. I'm currently in a weak state, and my current combat strength is not even comparable to an ordinary grade 4 supreme god. Even if I tried to help you by force, I'm afraid it would only make things worse. Yes, Zhou Fight nodded. He knew that Lord of 10,000 Evils wasn't lying and said, You don't have to help me. I should be able to deal with two existences at the quasi-supreme will realm. Coincidentally, I'd like to see how strong I am now. The Lord of 10,000 Evils looked at Zhou Fight in shock, but he thought about it and didn't say anything. Believed that Zhou Fight would not force himself. Since he said it could be done, it definitely could be done, right at that moment. The quasi-supreme will realm existence wearing ice blue armor and holding an ice blue spear, said Common People's Regal. We've been waiting for you. He pointed his spear at Zhou Fight and said coldly, I, Monan, have come to take your life under the orders of the Void Emperor. And me, Sheila said with a smile. If you want to fight, fight. Cut the crap. Zhou Fight grinned. Then he directly drew the Zhuan Yuan divine sword and pointed the tip of the sword at the Ultimate Void army in the distance. Soldiers, listen to my orders. Kill. 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 The blazing Sun Divine Kingdom's God Spirit army immediately charged towards the other party. Even though the other party surpassed them in all aspects in terms of the number of God Spirits, they did not have any fear in their hearts when facing such an enemy. Kill! Monan and Sheila did not say much when they saw this and directly sent an army over. The two armies quickly clashed and began a bloody battle. Zhou Fight was not in a hurry to take action. Instead, he first took out the Bodhi Supreme and asked if the other party had any means to stop him from inciting incite defection. The result was within Zhou Fight's expectations. Yes! This also meant that his heavenly summoning and land of earth, a minister of the king, were temporarily useless. He immediately activated Heart Thief and observed who was carrying the treasures that prevented him from using heavenly, summoning and the coast of earth. In the end, he realized that he couldn't be seen. The other party seemed to have prepared a method to prevent he from observing. With his heart pirate lord talent, he couldn't even see what the other party had that could be stolen. I guess we'll have to go head to head, Zhou Fight muttered to himself. He had no fear in his heart. He only felt that many god spirits would probably die in this battle. Even a group of supreme gods would probably die. Fortunately, he had the means to revive, so he wasn't too worried about resurrection after the war. Then he stopped thinking about it. With the Zhuan divine sword in hand, he transformed into a 9-colored stream of light and flew brazenly towards Monan and Sheila. How dare you! When Monan and Sheila saw that Zhou Fight actually dared to rush towards them alone, they could not help but sneer. However, the two deities did not dare to underestimate each other. They flew over together and fought Zhou Fight. Seeing this, Zhou Fight raised his right hand from afar and executed the myriad methods, star palm. Monan waved the ice spear in his hand and stabbed towards the other party's palm. He saw a divine spear. Phantom fly out and shoot towards the golden palm of the myriad methods, star palm. The two sides quickly collided. Boom! A huge explosion occurred in the center of the collision between the myriad method's star palm and the phantom of the divine spear, causing the surrounding void to shatter, revealing the endless darkness behind the ultimate void. Zhou Fight, Monan, and Sheila were all blasted more than 10 light years away by the aftershock of the explosion. Next, the three deities flew towards the other party. In the blink of an eye, they arrived before them. Monan held an ice spear and fought. Zhou Fight, who was holding the Xuanyuan divine sword, clang. Clang, clang, clang. The two sides fought rapidly, exchanging hundreds of blows in the blink of an eye. The two sides fought rapidly, exchanging hundreds of blows in the blink of an eye. Sheila, who saw this scene not far away, was secretly shocked. He was Monan's good friend, so he knew Monan's attainments in spear techniques very well. Monan's close combat ability was enough to be ranked in the top 10 among the many quasi-supreme will realm subordinates under the Void Emperor. However, this common people's Regal was clearly just a newly promoted Grade 1 Supreme God. He relied on a mysterious law skill to have the strength of the quasi-supreme will realm. Now, in a close combat, he was actually not inferior to Monan at all. How could Sheila not be shocked? The Emperor is right. If we let this common people's Regal continue gaining strength, he will definitely become a future threat to our ultimate Void race. Sheila's killing intent intensified. He pulled off the 5 pockets on his waist and threw them into the sky. 5 streams of light flew out of the 5 bags and landed in the ultimate void, turning into 5 huge, terrifying beasts. Some of them were like wolves, some were like tigers, and some had twisted bodies. Just a glance could make ordinary god spirits go crazy. Some would produce pure faith in their hearts with just a glance. The last fear behemoth was a huge dragon. From the aura on his body, it was a corpse demon dragon at the quasi-supreme will realm. The Asura evil dragons, under the Lord of 10,000 evils, were like infants in front of this demonic corpse dragon, under the lead of the corpse demon. Dragon, the 5 terrifying beasts rushed towards Zhou Fight and surrounded him with Monan. And that's not all. After Sheila released the 5 terrifying beasts, he still chanted spells on the spot and used supplementary spells to enhance the 5 terrifying beasts, allowing them to improve their combat strengths. After 20 consecutive auxiliary curses, the combined combat strength of these 5 terrifying beasts was even comparable to 2 quasi-supreme will realm experts. Zhou Fight could have only tied with Monan. With the addition of these 5 terrifying beasts, he was directly suppressed by they, and his situation quickly became dangerous. However, Zhou Fight was not afraid at all. Instead, he fought even more fiercely, as if he did not care about his life. Monan and the 5 beasts were very shocked by Zhou Fight's desperate actions. However, they were happy to do so. This way, Zhou Fight could die earlier, and they would at most be injured. But soon, they realized that something was wrong. This was because when Zhou Fight's attack landed on them, it could easily cause damage to their divine bodies. And when their attacks landed on Zhou Fight's body, they did not leave any damage, as if Zhou Fight had an immortal body. The defense of the armor on him is very strong. We can't break through it. Soon, Monan discovered the reason why he could not hurt Zhou Fight. When Zhou Fight saw that they had recognized the quasi-supreme will divine artifact below supreme grade, he did not care and continued to attack they crazily. I'll do it. Watch me deal with this armor of his. One of the 5 behemoths, a twisted behemoth, said. His voice rumbled. Just his? As words alone could cause great fear to ordinary god spirits. However, this naturally had no effect on Zhou Fight, who had the divine talisman of faith. However, this huge beast did not expect its words to affect Zhou Fight. He formed hand seals in the void from afar and chanted an incantation. When Zhou Fight saw this, he did not hesitate to slash out 3-sword ki with the power of the myriad methods star palm to stop the other party from using his methods. Block him, protect Guru. Sheila, who saw this scene from afar, hurriedly reminded, loudly, I'll do it. When Monan heard this, he immediately came in front of Guru and protected him. However, he only blocked the sword energy of the previous 2 myriad methods star palms and felt that his divine power was insufficient. He was shocked and hurriedly retreated to the side. Behind him, Guru's expression changed as he forcefully withstood the final blow. Rip! Guru's head split into 2, and he died, but he still completed his law skill before he died. Go! He roared. The next second, an illusory divine light shot out and hit Zhou Fight, making it impossible for him to dodge. Zhou Fight frowned as he looked at the supreme weapon he was wearing. The sun below supreme grade on his body actually slowly became transparent and finally completely disappeared. However, he could sense that his below supreme grade had only temporarily disappeared. It had not really disappeared. After a while, when the power of the illusory divine light dissipated, it would appear on him again. Ha! Common people's regal, without that powerful armor. Let's see how you can deal with our joint attack. The corpse demon dragon laughed. Common people's regal? Your death is here, Monan said coldly. Sheila, who was in the distance, also looked at Zhou Fight with a vicious expression. It cost me one of my generals. Common people's regal, I want to use your death to compensate for my losses. After saying that, he immediately ordered the other 4 pets to attack Zhou Fight. Seeing this, Monan immediately joined forces with them to deal with Zhou Fight. Zhou Fight soon engaged them in battle again. Without below supreme grade, many wounds quickly appeared on Zhou Fight's body when he fought them. This was also because he had a grade 1 supreme sacred body. The defense of his body was comparable to a grade 3 supreme divine artifact. Otherwise, he would have been severely injured. However, even so, his performance still shocked Monan and them. They never expected that. Without the protection of that powerful armor, this common people's regal could actually withstand the combined offensive of these god spirits with just his physical defense. One had to know that among them were 2 quasi-supreme willpower realm combatants. Behind them was Sheila, a quasi-supreme willpower realm expert, who was assisting them in dealing with Zhou Fight. The joint attack of 3 quasi-supreme willpower experts only caused Zhou Fight some superficial injuries. This was something they had never expected. The more they felt that the growth of the common people's regal was a future threat to them, so they were even more ruthless. Zhou Fight laughed out loud. As Zhou Fight's main battle avatar, not only was he not afraid of being surrounded by powerful enemies, he was even more excited. Okay. I haven't had this much fun in a long time. He smiled happily. After saying that, he suddenly slashed at the 5 of them with the sword energy of the myriad method's star palm. The 5 of them had already witnessed the power of this sword energy. None of them dared to resist it head-on, and they dodged. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Zhou Fight immediately withdrew and flew higher into the sky, looking down at the 5 god spirits. Common people's regal, stop struggling and acting. Tough! You're definitely going to die today. Sheila looked at Zhou Fight viciously. Common people's regal, if you're willing to seal the divine power in your body and surrender to my master, I can make the decision to spare your life. You're talented. Even the supreme god won't be your end. It's very likely that you'll reach the supreme will realm in the future. You don't want to die here today, right? Join our ultimate void race. The void emperor won't mistreat you. He will treat you better than the supreme will. In the future, we might all have to call you Lord, Monan suddenly said. Sheila immediately glared at Monan. However, Monan ignored Sheila completely and looked at Zhou Fight sincerely. That's tempting. Zhou Fight smiled and said, but the supreme will is also very good to me, so I refuse. When Monan heard this, his expression immediately darkened. I gave you face, but you don't want it. Attack together, kill him. He said angrily. Then he took the lead and rushed towards Zhou Fight. The other 4 beasts also followed Monan and attacked Zhou Fight. Sheila sneered and continued to use his methods to assist them in their offensive against Zhou Fight. Ha 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 ha. If you want to fight, just fight. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Why didn't you do this earlier? I'll let you understand the new ability I mastered after becoming a supreme god. Zhou Fight laughed. Then his divine body suddenly emitted an infinite golden light. This golden light was so dazzling that the 5 god spirits who rushed over had no choice but to cover their eyes to prevent their eyes from being pierced by this golden light. After the golden light dissipated, they looked at the Zhou War and was immediately shocked. But a 9-clawed golden dragon that was 90,000 light years tall replaced Zhou original position and lay in the ultimate void. The divine body of this eastern divine dragon was really too powerful. Coupled with the terrifying dragon might, Monin and they were even stunned on the spot when they saw this eastern divine dragon. It was a long time before they came back to their senses. When Zhou saw their reaction, his heart was as calm as an ancient well. He looked at the ultimate void battlefield and even saw the sanctuary of the ultimate void race in the distance. This 95 Supreme King Dragon God's body still has many mysteries to explore. He thought, right at that moment. Even though Sheila could tell that the 95 Supreme King Dragon God was extraordinary, he still said coldly, "What's the point of having a big body? Those that would die would still die. Attack!" After the 3 terrifying beasts heard Sheila's order, they immediately charged at the 95 Supreme King Dragon God. However, only the corpse demon dragon with the strength of the quasi-supreme will realm stood rooted to the ground, trembling as it looked at Zhou Supreme Dragon God body in extreme fear. Sheila was furious when he saw this. "Corpse Demon Dragon, what are you doing? Hurry up and kill he, Master." The Corpse Demon Dragon's voice was trembling, and its tone was filled with fear. "I don't dare to attack him. His bloodline is far superior to mine. If I attack him, I'll be devoured by the law of the dragon. You're already at the quasi-supreme will realm. Even the backlash of the law of the dragon won't hurt you much." Sheila said angrily, I wouldn't dare." The Corpse Demon Dragon naturally understood that logic. However, the fear that came from the depths of his blood made him not dare to attack Zhou even if he understood this principle. "How dare you disobey me?" Sheila was furious. "Master, I'm not..." The Corpse Demon Dragon hurriedly explained. However, Sheila did not want to listen to his explanation at all. He was now focused on killing Zhou. This way, he could be in the limelight in front of the Void Emperor. When the Void Emperor was happy, he might reward him with a treasure that could advance to the Supreme Will realm. At that time, he could reach the heavens in a single step. Thinking of this, he took a deep breath and formed hand seals with both hands. He whispered, "Sacrifice seal." The next second, the Corpse Demon Dragon's eyes revealed fear, and then there was a bang. His divine spark and heart exploded almost at the same time. The divine spark and heart of a quasi-supreme will realm dragon god shattered at the same time, instantly providing this dragon god with extremely terrifying power. The Corpse Demon Dragon's pale eyes instantly turned blood red. At the same time, a large amount of blood mist and defeated divine power spread out around his dragon body. This was a phenomenon caused by its dragon body being unable to suppress an overly shocking power, causing its power to leak out. Seeing this scene, Manan was secretly shocked. Sheila was really crazy. He actually abandoned he most important pet in order to kill the common people's regal, even though this sacrifice seal would provide extremely terrifying power in a short period of time and could even increase the Corpse Demon Dragon's combat strength to the peak of the quasi-supreme will realm. There was a time limit. Once the time passed, the Corpse Demon Dragon would definitely die. However, he could understand the other party's actions. If they killed this common people's regal, the Void Emperor's reward would definitely not disappoint them. After all, he stopped thinking and attacked the 95 Supreme King Dragon God with the other 3 beasts. They were actually very afraid under the influence of the 95 Supreme King Dragon God. They still had an extremely strong will and could barely attack Zhou. However, their combat strength was inevitably affected. Kill this huge dragon god as soon as possible. Otherwise, our combat strength will become weaker and weaker. At that time, we won't be able to kill him at all, Manan shouted. The other 3 beasts nodded and attacked Zhou 95 Supreme King Dragon God body. But soon, they were dumbfounded. This was because their attacks could not cause any damage to the dragon body. Even Manan's attack only left a few wounds on the dragon body, but these wounds recovered almost in the blink of an eye. An immortal body? When Manan saw this, his expression turned ugly. How were they supposed to fight? Roar! Right at that moment, an extremely crazy dragon roar came from behind them. They turned around and realized that it was the crazy Corpse Demon Dragon. At this moment, the Corpse Demon Dragon emitted an extremely terrifying aura. It was already standing at the peak of the quasi-supreme will realm. corpse demon dragon. Kill him, Sheila said excitedly. He looked at his corpse demon dragon as if he could already see the scene of him advancing to the supreme will realm in the future. At that moment, a faint voice rang out. It was Zhou Fight's voice. Corpse demon dragon, kill him. Shortly after, under Sheila's dumbfounded gaze, the corpse demon dragon trembled for a moment, before turning around and looking at him with hatred and bloodthirstiness. Roar! The corpse demon dragon roared and turned into a blood-colored divine light that flew towards Sheila. Evil creature, how dare you betray your master and attack him? Sheila was furious and felt even more embarrassed. He had used the Tao of beast taming to become a quasi-supreme willpower realm expert. He was best known for his methods of controlling giant beasts. Now, in front of a great enemy, his behemoth actually turned around to deal with him. How many colleagues would laugh at him when he returned? Thinking of this, he said angrily to the corpse demon dragon that was charging at him, B-starred, if I can make you, I can destroy you. Go. He grabbed all the beast bags on him and threw them all at the corpse demon dragon. As these beast bags flew over, a large number of Master God tier and Supreme God level beasts flew out of the beast bags and attacked the corpse demon dragon. At a glance, there were actually 13 Supreme God level beasts and hundreds of supremacies and God level beasts. These giant beasts attacked the corpse demon dragon together, and a life and death battle immediately erupted between the two sides. Do your best. Let's kill this traitor. Sheila's face was filled with anger. He formed hand seals with both hands and cast support abilities on the giant beasts summoned by him, helping them deal with the corpse demon dragon together. At the same time, he cast all kinds of negative abilities on the corpse demon dragon, reducing its combat power. As a result, the difference in strength between these beasts and the corpse demon dragon instantly decreased greatly. However, Sheila's expression did not improve. Instead, it became even gloomier. This was because he saw that the corpse demon dragon was still too powerful, even though he was supporting his behemoth from the side. He, who had already reached the peak of the quasi-supreme willpower realm, was far from being injured by these beasts that only had the strength of Master God tier and ordinary supreme gods. Even if his strength had been weakened to a certain extent because of Sheila, now he, a dragon, was actually suppressing these 13 supreme gods and 100 Master God tier beasts. He was a little anxious. He had already used all his means, but he was still unable to suppress the corpse demon dragon. If this continued, not to mention the behemoths that he had just released, he might even lose his life. Now, he could only wait for Monan and they to finish off Zhou Fight before letting they come back to help him. He looked at Monan and them. Then he saw Monan looking at Zhou Fight, who had transformed into the 95 Supreme King Dragon God with a helpless expression, as if he could not handle it. Sheila was stunned for a moment before he said angrily, Monan, what are you doing? Why are you still hiding at a time like this? Where's your formless book? Hurry up and take it out to deal with Zhou Fight. If anything happens to me, don't blame me for complaining to the Void Emperor. Upon hearing this, Monan frowned slightly. However, when he saw Sheila's situation, he could not help but laugh and shake his head. Sheila, to think that you often say that you have many giant beasts under your command and their combined strength is higher than mine. I didn't expect you to be forced into a desperate situation by your own giant beasts today. When I go back, I must tell my other colleagues about your experience. That's fine too. Let me, the benevolent and compassionate one, personally rescue you. Sheila's face turned red when he heard this, but he also knew that he looked very ugly. Monan's smile was too normal. He could not even refute this guy's mockery of him. At the same time, Zhou Fight was also observing the scene below from the perspective of the 95 Supreme King Dragon God, the corpse demon dragons. Surrender was within his expectations. Even though the corpse demon dragon was a quasi-supreme willpower realm expert, as long as he did not transcend the laws and reach the supreme willpower realm, he would definitely be restricted. By the law of the dragon, after all, this was a natural law restriction that was rooted in the bloodline of all dragons. Unless one broke through the limits of the natural law, they would not be able to break free. As for Zhou Fight's 95 Supreme King Dragon God body, as it had fused with many pure-blooded dragons, the legendary dragons even had the Dragon God of all life, a top-notch Dragon God body with the Supreme Dragon God bloodline from the alternate universe. Just this body's attainments in the law of the dragon had already surpassed the limits of the law. Under such a law of the dragon, unless his enemy was a dragon at the supreme will realm, he would definitely be suppressed by the law of the dragon's innate bloodline and laws. Therefore, the corpse demon dragon, whose strength had increased greatly, turned to deal with his former master just because of his words. A corpse demon dragon at the peak of the quasi-supreme will realm, if not for the fact that it was suppressed. By my law of the dragon, I'm afraid my 95 supreme king dragon god body would have been injured by him. Zhou Fight thought to himself. Of course, if there was really a victor, the victory would definitely be his. The 95. Supreme King Dragon God's undying body was supported by the power of all the God Spirit soldiers under him. Divine power, divine spirit power, vitality, and even the power of will. It was just as its introduction said. Unless his army was completely wiped out, or the difference in strength between him and the other party was too great to make up for. Otherwise, it was definitely not something a corpse demon dragon who stood at the peak of the quasi. Supreme Will Realm could defeat. Zhou Fight estimated that only a Supreme Will Realm expert could defeat him, the 95 Supreme King Dragon God. He looked at his God Spirit army. He discovered that his divine army had actually obtained the supreme blessing bestowed by him after transforming into the 95 Supreme King Dragon God. He casually clicked on the information of a soldier and looked at the supreme blessing. Supreme blessing, name, conqueror. Supreme blessing effect. When the soldiers under your command fight the enemy, their combat strength will increase by 10% for every 10 minutes of continuous battle, up to a maximum of 60%. When the conqueror effect is stacked to 60%, the soldiers who have the supreme blessing will obtain life drain ability when fighting the enemy. They can continuously absorb the life force of the enemy in battle to recover their injuries. The conqueror effect and life drain effect will disappear after 60 minutes. It's a practical blessing. Zhou Fight nodded in satisfaction. Not only could it increase one's combat strength, it could also increase one's recovery effect. This supreme blessing was simply perfect. Then he came back to his senses and heard what Manan and Sheila had said. Yeah. Does this Monin still have a trump card that he hasn't used? Zhou Fight was a little surprised. Then he saw Monin take out a blood-colored book from his storage treasure. Seeing that Zhou Fight was also looking at him, he smiled calmly and introduced, "Few enemies have been able to drive me to this point where I have no choice but to use it. Common people's regal, you're very impressive, so I'll bestow you with the highest honor of dying, to be able to die in the hands of my ancestors' formless book." After he finished speaking, he calmly flipped through, the formless book in his hand. Zhou Fight was naturally not stupid enough to let he calmly use his means. The he immediately opened his dragon mouth and saw a terrifying, colorful dragon breath gather in his mouth. This dazzling dragon breath contained the power of the abyss dragon breath, the time dragon breath, the elemental dragon, breath, the destruction dragon, breath, the star dragon breath, the origin dragon breath, and various other top-notch dragon god dragon breaths. When they gathered together, coupled with the power of the 95 Supreme King Dragon God that Zhou Fight had transformed into, the power of this dragon breath reached an earth-shattering level. Roar! An earth-shattering dragon roar rang out. The next second, a dazzling dragon breath spewed out of his mouth and struck Manan. Monan did not seem to care about this at all, as he flipped through the formless book in his hand. He muttered to himself. Common People's Regal's current strength is probably even stronger than Corpse Demon Dragon. It seems that an ordinary quasi-supreme willpower expert won't be able to deal with this guy. We can only invite that person's formless true blood. As he spoke, Zhou Fight's supreme dragon breath also descended on Manan's head. At that moment, the formless book in Manan's hand suddenly emitted a blood-colored light. This blood-colored light quickly formed a blood-colored light barrier around the book and Manan, enveloping them. When Zhou Fight's supreme dragon breath landed on the blood-colored light barrier, it was actually blocked by the blood-colored light barrier. It could not injure Manan at all. When Zhou Fight saw this, surprise flashed across his golden dragon eyes. He looked at the formless book in the other party's hand and felt the powerful aura emitted from it. He muttered, "Will holy artifact? This Monin actually has a will holy artifact?" His expression turned solemn. Even though he also had a will holy artifact, it only had supplementary effects. Now that Monan had taken it out, it probably had an offensive effect. That's fine. Well, even if I die, it's just a clone. All the treasures on me can be directly thrown into the #1 treasure vault for safekeeping. There's no need to worry about them being lost. In that case, let's see what level my strongest combat strength has reached. Is it comparable to a supreme will? Facing Monan, who seemed to possess an offensive will holy artifact, not only was Zhou Fight not afraid, he even had the thought of challenging the limits of his combat strength. If it were Zhou Zhou himself, he probably wouldn't have made such a choice. However, Zhou Fight did it without hesitation. When Monan saw that Zhou Fight was not afraid and was even eager to give it a try, his originally confident heart became uncertain. Why did this guy look like he was not afraid at all? Could it be that he couldn't tell that what I was about to use was a supreme will level technique? Monan took a deep breath and decided not to think about it anymore. Since he had already activated the formless book, no matter what methods Zhou Fight had, he had to take them. He had no choice but to shoot. Soon, he flipped to the page he wanted. A bloated being with dark purple skin and many complicated void engravings engraved on the surface of his skin was engraved on this page. It was drawn in blood and looked very realistic and bloody. Monan looked at him and gently tapped the existence. The next second, he felt that the Supreme God's divine power in his body was quickly consumed and fused into the existence on the page. In less than half a second, nearly 70% of the Supreme God's divine power in his body was completely absorbed. Monan's face was pale. His voice was weak and respectful. Ultimate void race. Monan. Ancestor. Honorable Harlong. Please take action to resolve the future threat of our ultimate void race. As soon as he finished speaking, the portrait of Honorable Harlong expanded rapidly. In just a moment, it left the paper and stood on it, becoming an ultimate void creature the size of a palm. He sized up his divine body and said unhappily, "Your supreme divine power is too weak. This divine body of mine only has 1/10,000th of the power I had at my peak. If it were used by Montague, I would have at least half the combat power I had at my peak. Why did he give you the holy artifact of his will? Isn't that a complete waste?" Monans revealed an awkward expression when he heard this. Then he said solemnly, "Ancestor Meng Tuo can't make a move. Otherwise, the Supreme Will will also send an existence at the Supreme Will realm under his command. In order for me to successfully kill the Supreme Lord's reserve army, Ancestor boldly lent me the formless book and left a portrait of your true blood in it. I see. Forget it, forget it. Let me, this dead ancestor, do my best for the future of our ultimate Void clan." After saying that, Venerable Harlong looked at Zhou Fight with a flash of surprise in his eyes. Well, what a young Supreme Lord reserve army. At such a young age, his strength has already reached such a level. That's right. That's what makes it worth my while. Monan, remember, I only have the power of one blow. After that, the rest is up to you. Monan immediately said solemnly, "Don't worry, Venerable Harlong. As long as we get rid of this guy, we can easily destroy the remaining God's spirit army of the Supreme Will." Okay. Honorable Harlong nodded and flew into the sky. As he flew, he saw he's divine body rapidly enlarge. 1 light year, 100 light years, 10,000 light years, 100,000 light years, 1,000,000 light years. Venerable Harlong had grown to the size of 1,000,000 light years. At this moment, he could even see the end of the ultimate void battlefield with his vision. He looked down at Zhou Fight and grinned. "Countless years ago, I perished in battle against other alternate universes. I thought I wouldn't wake up again, but now I can see you youngsters again. It's a pity that you and I are on different sides. Otherwise, I would really like to have a chat with the geniuses of your generation to understand your views on cultivation." Harlong sighed in his heart. After experiencing true life and death, he had a new perspective on war and the struggle for benefits, but this didn't affect his killing intent. Common people's regal. Die, at the hands of an old man like me. He opened its bloody mouth and bit Zhou Fight. Zhou Fight wanted to resist. However, he quickly realized that he couldn't even move. Ha 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 ha. Hearing Harlong's laughter, Zhou Fight tried one last time but failed. He simply put away all his treasures and waited quietly. Howl Harlong ate Zhou Fight in one bite, seeing this scene. The entire battlefield fell silent. In particular, the response of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom's God Spirit Army was even greater. Everyone, calm down. Nothing happened to His Majesty, just as the morale of the army was about to be shaken. Baiyun's voice gave them peace of mind. When the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom's God Spirit Army heard this, they immediately believed that nothing would happen to their emperor. They immediately continued to fight the enemy in front of them. On the other side, he enjoyed the flesh and blood of Zhou Fight in the beginning after eating Zhou Fight in one bite. But His expression quickly changed. Why doesn't it smell like destiny? What about the common people's regal? Without my life, of course. But you won't get to find out. Behind Harlong, Zhou Fight looked at he calmly and said. Harlong suddenly turned around and saw Zhou Fight, who was completely unharmed. How can you be totally fine? Harlong looked shocked. Then, he didn't have time to think about the reason. He opened his huge mouth again. As he prepared to devour him, he said, I will definitely kill you before I leave. Zhou Fight's expression did not change as he watched this scene. When the shockingly huge mouth descended on his head with supreme might, it was as if it wanted to replicate the scene just now and devour him to death. And yet, just as Harlong was about to swallow Zhou Fight, his huge divine body suddenly turned into countless dark purple blood threads and dissipated. I can't. Accompanied by the dissipation of all the dark purple blood threads, Venerable Harlong whimpered indignantly. After the voice faded away, the battlefield returned to calmness. Zhou Fight turned to look at Monin, Sheila, and the three giant beasts. Under him, they saw they looking at themselves in shock, as if they had seen something that they could not believe. How come you're not dead? After Manan recovered from his shock, he shouted loudly, as if he could not accept the reality in front of him. That was a supreme will realm existence. Even if Venerable Harlong only had 1/10,000th of his strength at his peak, it was definitely not something a puny quasi-supreme will could resist. Not to mention that the common people's regal was only a newly advanced grade 1 supreme god. Sheila, who was far away, also stared at Zhou Fight, wanting to hear what reason he had to give. When Zhou Fight saw that they was so inquisitive, he smiled and said, idiot. He suddenly transformed into the 95 Supreme King Dragon God and slashed at Manan with the Xuan Yuan divine sword in his mouth. Even though Manan was still shocked that the common people's regal could withstand a single attack from Harlong and not die, he was not careless when he saw Harlong's attack. He immediately took out a grade 2 supreme divine artifact that looked like a shield to defend against Harlong's attack. The distance between the two sides disappeared in the blink of an eye. The next second, the Xuan Yuan divine sword, mentioned by the 95 Supreme King Dragon God, slashed at Monin's shield. Boom, 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 boom. Where the divine sword and shield collided, a series of explosions occurred in the void. The ultimate void within a radius of 10 light years shattered, revealing the ultimate void, great cosmos, behind the ultimate void battleground. At a glance, one could even see other alternate universes. Soon, however, the shattered ultimate void began repairing itself. After the light of the void explosion dissipated, they saw the 95 Supreme King Dragon God and Monin wrestling with each other through the Chuan Yuan divine sword and the shield. Neither side was willing to give in. They were both using their swords and shields to determine the victor. It was as if the sword would break the opponent's shield first. It all depended on whether the shield could defend against his opponent's sword attacks. Sheila saw the situation and wanted to break out of the situation by joining in. However, the corpse demon dragon had been attacking him crazily, making him unable to be distracted at all. Sheila saw this situation and wanted to break out of the situation by joining in. However, the corpse demon dragon had been attacking he crazily, making him unable to be distracted at all. You have the will holy artifact, so you should be able to deal with the common people's regal, right? Sheila, who could not help at all, could only defend against the corpse demon dragon's attack while praying in his heart. However, in the next moment, he saw a scene that made him despair. Zhou Fight, who was fighting Manan, suddenly smiled sinisterly. Is this all you've got, Manan? What? Monin, who was resisting the power of Zhou Fight's Xuan Yuan divine sword with all his might, saw that Zhou Fight still had strength left. His expression changed drastically. The next second, an even more terrifying power erupted. From the Xuan Yuan divine sword, and in the blink of an eye, it broke the grade 2 supreme divine artifact shield in front of Manan. Immediately after, the Xuan Yuan divine sword slashed at Manan without stopping, and he was beheaded in an instant. The moment Zhou Fight swept past Manan's body, he suddenly stretched out his dragon claw and grabbed Manan's head. Then he twisted it forcefully, and a dark purple supreme god lattice appeared in his hand. The moment Zhou Fight swept past Manan's body, he suddenly stretched out his dragon claw and grabbed Manan's head. Then he twisted it forcefully, and a dark purple supreme god lattice appeared in his hand. However, at this moment, he was only a body of will. After being trapped by Zhou Fight's supreme god, he could not do anything at all. He could only watch as Zhou Fight controlled him at will. Suddenly, Zhou Fight seemed to have heard something and smiled. "Spare you? It's not impossible." His expression turned solemn, and he said, "Then swear on your own will that from now on, you will leave the ultimate void race and officially join this Emperor's Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom, becoming a member of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom's subjects. As long as you can do it, this Emperor will promise to let you live." Monan's expression changed. He hesitated for a long time, but when he saw Zhou Fight's increasingly dangerous gaze, he was immediately alarmed. He didn't dare to delay any longer and hurriedly agreed. He began to say that he was willing to join the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom and become a subject of the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom. When Zhou Fight felt the connection between him and the other party, a smile appeared on his face. From then on, other than the main body and clone, the Blazing Sun Divine Kingdom finally had another quasi-supreme willpower realm expert. Moreover, the strength of this quasi-supreme willpower realm expert was considered not bad even among all the quasi-supreme willpower realm experts.